In Luke chapter 12, Jesus tells a story about a rich fool. He's confronted with an income that massively exceeds his expectation, and he decides this is the time to take early retirement. This is what I'll do, says the man in the parable. I will tear down my barns and build bigger ones, and there I will store my surplus grain. And I'll say to myself, you have plenty of grain laid up for many years. Take life easy, eat, drink, be merry. Now, in the story, Jesus calls that man a fool. To us, actually, he's the epitome of wisdom. For a lot of people, that's exactly their game plan for life. That is their ambition. Make as much money as you can, as quickly as you can, invest it well, take early retirement. And it's amazing how many people will justify the sacrifices they make for their career because of that model. So it's like, yeah, of course, I know I'm not seeing much of my family right now, but in just a few years, it'll all be different. Or yeah, I know I can't really be involved in the life of church now, but after the next promotion, then I'll have a lot more disposable time on my hands. Now, you see, when we talk about things like that, it sounds so plausible, doesn't it? But actually, Solomon has learned the hard way to have a very different perspective. He looks back on those intervening years and says, actually, what happens is you slowly suffocate the relationships that you told yourself you were working for. We alienate those around us. And when all that additional time finally materializes, if it does at all, because actually often it proves to be a mirage that just keeps moving into the distance the closer we get to it. But if it ever does materialize, we suddenly find there's actually no one who wants to spend it with us. Earlier in Ecclesiastes, Solomon has told us that when we see our work as from the hand of God, then we can find satisfaction in our toil. Our work and our relationship with our work stays in its proper place within the matrix of the different kinds of callings that God has put on our lives. You see, yes, we are called to work, whether that's paid or not, although I think Solomon very much has paid employment in mind in this part of Ecclesiastes. But we're also called to be involved in other relationships and to be involved in the family and the mission of the church. And when one aspect of our calling eclipses others, then it's likely that we're losing balance. And as Solomon looks back on his life, that's his conclusion. I lost balance. And he ends up asking himself, I did all that work, but at the end of it all, for who was I toiling? It's a similar question that is posed to the man who built bigger barns in Jesus' story in Luke 12. Who will get what you have prepared for yourself? I think it was Woody Allen who said, I only want to be able to disprove the theory that money can't buy happiness. Well, Solomon is able to say that he had the opportunity to do precisely that. He ended up rich and alienated and lonely and miserable. That isn't God's wisdom. No, you see God's wisdom in the early life of the church in the book of Acts. What Solomon has ended up with is totally different from church life. In church life, we put our stuff and our financial, our material resources at each other's disposal. There's no jealousy, there's no envy. What there is generosity and servant-heartedness. Yeah? All believers, Luke writes in the book of Acts, all the believers were one in heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. With great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and God's grace was so powerfully at work in them that there were no needy persons among them. From time to time, those who owned land or houses sold them, brought the money from the sales and put it at the apostles' feet. And it was distributed to anyone who had need. I think that captures beautifully what Solomon is driving at in this section of Ecclesiastes 4. See, rather than me working to make as much money as I can, as quickly as I can, and sacrificing everything and everyone on the altar of a job that has become an idol, no, what actually happens is that my work instead can be something that allows me to build relationships and invest in community. See, rather than my work killing relationships and alienating me from community, it becomes something that actually strengthens and invigorates those things. It's fascinating to me that in the midst of that passage from Acts that we've just read, Luke stops to explain that such a revolutionary attitude to work and money and possessions is only possible because God's grace was so powerfully at work. You see, it's one thing to recognize the path of wisdom, but it takes something from beyond ourselves to enable us to walk it, to actually be wise. You see, folly we can find on our own, but wisdom, that we need somebody else to guide us to that. And often, as he does, he will take us far beyond anything that we had expected.